I will now call the meeting to order. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to adopt the final agenda?
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. Our next order of business is to adopt the minutes from the July 6th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. The motion carries. We are now moving on to our discussion items. We have two items of discussion for our agenda tonight. The first is item 3.1, Final Plat application for Madelyn Trail by Pulte Homes. I will now turn this over to the Community and Economic Development Director, Marty Dole, for the staff presentation. Marty, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. Yes, before you this evening is the final plat for Madelyn Trail by Pulte Homes. So we do have a staff presentation this evening, and then we do have representatives from the development team in the audience if you have any questions for them as well. So just a little bit of background, how we got to this point. So this application dates back to earlier this year. There was a neighborhood meeting held on February 23rd. From there, the sketch plat process began. That was heard by the Planning Commission on March 2nd and the City Council by March 8th, both bodies providing feedback. In May, on May 4th, the Planning Commission considered the preliminary plat for this development and did recommend approval on a 7-0 vote. And on May 10th, the City Council did approve preliminary plat on a 5-0 vote. This development also requested a comprehensive plan amendment, which I will talk about in a little bit more detail in a minute, but that amendment was approved by the Metropolitan Council on May 28th. So just some background and refresher on the development property. This is a proposed plan unit development with R1 underlying zoning. The property, which is located just south of 78th Street West in the Whispering Hills development, is proposing 49 single-family lots on approximately 20 acres, 13.6 of them being developable. Part of the Planning Commission's charge in reviewing final plat is to ensure consistency with preliminary plat, and staff does believe that the final plat is generally consistent with the preliminary plat that was approved. So as I noted, this parcel did request a comprehensive plan amendment. The parcel had been owned by the school district and was guided as public and institutional. The applicant had proposed a comp plan amendment to low-density residential, which, as you'll recall, requires 2.25 to 6 units per acre. This development is proposing 3.61 units per acre, which would fall into that low-density residential category. That comp plan was approved by the Met Council on May 28th, and the City Council will be considering final approval of that at their meeting next week. In addition to a comp plan amendment, rezoning was requested. The area is currently zoned as agricultural with an intention to rezone to PUD with an R1 underlying zoning. That zoning ordinance is also to be considered by the council on Monday. Before you and also within your background packet is the final plat, kind of showing the layout and the outline of the development, and we can come back to this slide if there are questions later. One of the other charges of the Planning Commission when reviewing final plat is to ensure that conditions of the preliminary plat have been met. So as you'll recall, there were several conditions that were placed on preliminary plat that I will go through right now. One of those being that the submission of the comp plan amendment to the Met Council for review and final approval. That, as I mentioned, was approved on May 28th with the council to consider approval at their meeting next Monday. The second condition was the approval of the rezoning from Ag to PUD with final plat approval. Again, as noted, the council will be considering that on Monday as well. Number 3, address to the city's satisfaction all of the items that were outlined in the staff and engineers response memos. As you can imagine, we've had several rounds of revisions since then, and the final construction documents are nearing completion and will be required to be complete either upon or conditioned upon final approval. Number 4 was securing an easement with the adjacent property owner to the south in order to be able to utilize the drain tile on that property for the development, and ensuring that drain tile system was in operable condition. That easement has been secured. Number 5 was construction of or payment for the construction of Coachella Lane as a collector roadway along the length of the property. That Coachella Lane is included as part of the proposal. Number 6 was submission to and approval of the city attorney of all homeowners association documents and covenants for this development. The applicant has indicated that they will not have an active HOA, but will have a declaration for the HOA that will be submitted and will be required for review and conditioned upon final plat approval. Number 7 is compliance with all of the regulations of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. Again, those final approvals will be conditioned upon final plat and required prior to recording. Number 8, restoration of the on-site 1.2 acre wetland in conjunction with the MCWD. That wetland restoration is also included in the plans. Number 9 is entering into a development agreement with the city for this development. The city council will be considering that development agreement as part of their final plat review. Number 10, submission of letter of credit prior to any development happening. That letter of credit will be required to be provided prior to recording. Number 11 is obtaining all other necessary regulatory agency approvals. That has been satisfactorily addressed. Number 14, submitting title work along with the final plat and complying with the city attorney's plat opinion. That title work has been submitted, and the plat opinion has been complete, and the developer is working on responding to any items needed for that. And then number 15 was submitting the final plat to the city within 90 days of the prelim plat approval. That was also adequately addressed. So staff does feel that all of the preliminary plat conditions have either been addressed or, as is typical for many final plats, will be conditioned upon the final plat approval. As you'll recall, this property is proposing 49 single-family lots, the minimum lot area being 8665 square feet, a lot width of 68 feet, and a lot depth of 130. The side yard setbacks are intended to be 9 feet on each side, so a total of 18 feet minimum between buildings with a 15-foot corner lot setback. The property is also proposing the 30-foot front yard and 30-foot rear yard setback. And the applicant, as you'll recall, we had some discussion previously about impervious surface, is proposing a 5,000 maximum impervious surface per lot. Staff did provide some additional information about impervious surface in your background packet, indicating some of the differences between those two. Staff's conclusion is that the 5,000 square foot per lot would provide a additional 1,000 square feet of additional hard cover per lot, assuming a 4,000 foot home and hardcover driveway. That would range percentages from lots from 19% to the largest lot or 46% to the smallest lot, whereas the 50% per lot, which is what staff would recommend if desiring to go to a percentage, would have much more varying additional hardcover based on the size of the lot, from only 348 square feet to the smallest lot, from the smallest lot to 6,600 square feet for the largest lot. As you'll recall, there was some screening comments that were made as part of the preliminary plat proposal, and this cross-section graphic was shown. The proposal does include a modest elevation change in the rear yards of homes along 78th Street in Coachella, as well as adhering to the 25-foot landscape buffer in the rear of all double-fronted lots and 15-foot buffer on the side of triple-fronted lots. And as you can see from the landscape plan that was also included in your background packet, the plan is for these buffer areas to be very heavily planted and wooded. This property requires 2.287 acres of usable parkland for parkland dedication. The trails that will be constructed by the developer, which I will show on the next slide, will provide a credit of $51,060 towards that parkland dedication. So the applicant will be paying a parkland dedication fee with this development of $189,075. Another item of discussion during preliminary plat was related to the intersection of Coachella Lane and 78th Street West, and the question was whether or not that should be a four-way stop. Currently, that intersection does not meet the warrants for a four-way stop, but in discussions with the city engineer, that it would be something that would continue to be reviewed and looked at as traffic patterns continue. Once Coachella Lane is extended, it's likely that it would or could meet warrants at that time with additional development.
They have the pedestrian warnings similar to 18 in Coachella?
It potentially could. I think that would all.
I would think that that area probably has more traffic, I would think. But there's no four-way stop there.
Right. So this graphic before you shows in green the trails that will be built that are providing the parkland dedication credit in green. The blue is the sidewalks that will be included, the yellow being the crosswalks, and then the red dots indicate the stop signs. So you'll see there is not currently a four-way stop planned for the intersection of Coachella and 78th. As I've noted, Coachella Lane extension is a requirement of this development and is being planned by the developer. There is an existing 30 feet of right-of-way, and the applicant will be providing an additional 30 feet of right-of-way in their parcel to construct that collector roadway. One of the other items of discussion during preliminary plat was related to the southern property owner, the Kerber property, and easements that would be required. As I noted previously, an easement for the drain tile has been acquired. In addition, the applicant has worked with the Kerbers to receive a easement for a temporary turnaround so that the cul-de-sac on one of the roadways can extend into the Kerber property, and the easement that currently exists on the eastern side of the property for the Kerbers' access from 78th Street will be retained as well. One of the other notes and who spoke during the public hearing was the Mitchell properties that are to the west of this development. So the city and applicant are continuing to work with the Mitchells. In fact, city engineer Garen and I will be meeting with them tomorrow to talk about the driveway connections and utility extensions and stubs as a result of this development. Stormwater management, this is in the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, so will be subject to their rules and final approval. And as I noted earlier, the construction plans also do include the restoration of a 1.2 acre on-site wetland. So with that, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission recommend approval of this development with the following conditions: that all of the items outlined in the July 9th engineer's response memo and the final city approval of construction plans be conditioned, receiving final city approval on the construction plans for the extension of Coachella Lane, entering into a development agreement and paying all of the applicable fees to the city and providing the required financial guarantees, the final approvals necessary from the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, including on the restoration of the wetland, complying with all of the PUD district standards that will be established with rezoning, complying with the city attorney's plat opinion, submitting and recording any HOA declarations that will be applicable to this development, disclosing and recording a letter of interest outlining all requirements and standards within the PUD subdivision, as well as any additional disclosures, complying with all applicable requirements, reviews, and approvals of city staff for any entrance signs or monuments that are planned, recording the final plat within 120 days of approval, and furnishing the city with a certified Mylar copy of the plat evidence in filing with the county. And with that, Chair, that concludes our presentation.
Very good. Thank you very much, Director Marty Dole. I will now open the floor for the Planning Commission to discuss. Commissioners, any questions or comments for either staff or the applicant?
I have a question about the wetland. So is it currently a wetland?
It is currently a delineated wetland, but it's currently in a farm field condition. So it's essentially just a low spot in a farm field.
But ultimately pretty dry, right? I mean, I'm just assuming. I mean, it's there clearly, but it's once these homes are built, this wetland's gonna grow? Because it's gonna be kind of is it true to say it's gonna be a runoff?
Yeah, is that something, Ryan, you or Dean, you might be able to speak to?
Yeah. Please identify yourself. Thank you very much.
Ryan Bloom with Westwood Engineering. So yes, so right now, it is classified as a wetland. It was farmed in some years, but other years, when it was wet, it was a low spot. So we are restoring it, so we're giving it some depth, and we have treatment ponds on either side of it that'll treat the water first and then discharge the water to the restored wetland. So we're giving it a little bit more depth to it, 2 to 3 feet, and it's going to be planted with native seeding around it.
So when you say there's ponds on either side of it, that's not on this plan, right? I mean, is that,
Yeah, that would be, that's in the construction plans. What you've been provided, Commissioner Moore, members of the commission, is the plat. So the plat doesn't typically show that level of detail,
Okay.
but they are included on the construction plans.
so with this information, I'm just curious, who maintains this pond long-term? What is, or if there is a maintenance plan?
So I can answer a bit. So we have an obligation as a part of restoring the wetland. I think it's a period of 5 years, right, to monitor it and make sure that it's working, that the seeding is coming in, and then managing the native vegetation. Ultimately, the ponds themselves would be turned over to the city for long-term maintenance.
Yeah, that is correct. So typically, all of the wetland and the stormwater ponds, the city requires that those be deeded to the city. We are talking about two somewhat separate items. So the wetland itself typically does not require much, if any, maintenance once established, planting's been established in the wetland. But the stormwater ponds, typical to our other developments, do become the responsibility of the city to make sure that they're draining properly and that they're, occasionally need to be dredged or outlets need to be cleared out.
Okay. This is kind of a side item, but is that a new policy with the city?
It is, it's not new. I know that there have been some changes in the past prior to my arrival. I believe that the city had typically maintained and managed those, and then I think there was a stretch of time where the HOA was given that responsibility to maintain those stormwater ponds, but they just were not able to be maintained at the level that's necessary to keep them operating. So as I understand it, the city took that responsibility back some years ago, that those become the responsibility of the city.
That's great. Glad to hear that. And then one other question about the HOA. I just want to understand why there is no HOA. If you could just walk us through that explanation, that might be helpful.
Well, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I'm Dean Lauder. I'm with Pulte Homes, 7500 Flying Cloud Drive, Eden Prairie, Minnesota. There isn't really a reason to have the HOA. There was a decision that was made internally, I guess, to have property owners maintain their own property and do their own snow removal and things of that nature. And that usually drives the decision to have an HOA in a community or not. And so that's basically the reason why we determined not to have an HOA officially.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
Any other concerns or questions?
I guess just which on the 5,000 square feet or the 50%? You've talked about either one, but which one are we moving forward with?
Currently, the proposal is for 5,000 square feet. And again, staff believes that's reasonable and is comfortable with administering that if the commission agrees.
I got a question on the declarations of the development. If you don't have an HOA or board in the neighborhood, who is the authority of making sure those declarations get followed? Is that a city issue, or is that, and I don't know what what you're gonna have in your declarations.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I was actually a little confused about that myself because I don't know why we would necessarily bother, having a declaration of any kind. And I don't know that I've got a great answer for you in that respect. But I can try to research that more and find out what the reasoning behind it is, other than the fact that there was a decision not to provide the snow and the mow services. And so therefore, there would be other documents that would say protect the landscaping trees on the perimeter of the property. And I'm just sort of making a guess here that there would be some documentation recorded to protect those trees. So if they were to be removed, those property owners could be perhaps subject to some legal action, either by their neighbors or by the city.
And
Architectural control, I mean, that is really the only other reason to have an HOA, unless you have some common areas and, that you need to maintain.
Correct.
And Commissioner Kuhn, members of the commission, just as a note, it is a requirement or will be a condition of the final plat that those declarations will need to be reviewed by the city attorney. So the attorney will review them, and if there are questions about enforcement or whose responsibility any of those things would be, we would need to work those out prior to recording.
Right, because the neighborhood I live in, I mean, we mow our own lawn, we plow our own snow, but yeah, but we have an HOA and we have declarations, and I mean, there's the monuments that are owned by the HOA or deeded to the HOA or responsible for, and some common things, but it's kind of like the neighborhood takes care of it, and it's just one layer that the city doesn't have to deal with as far as, and that's, I guess, it's whether it's an HOA or a board, neighborhood board, or whatever you call it, to me, there should be something that goes with that. I don't know.
And that would be, I'd anticipate, part of the city's requirements. The city would not be looking to take on any of the duties that would traditionally be for the HOA. So if there are, and again, this is a document we haven't reviewed yet, but and anticipate we will soon. If there are duties that would fall to the city, that would likely require a conversation with the developer of, maybe we do need to have a board or something. It really depends on what's going to be included in that.
That was certainly my understanding, that that it would be included prior to a sale, but that would actually be a requirement pre-sale that any HOA documents are submitted.
It's actually required prior to the development being allowed to record. So we'd need to see those and review those and make sure we're good with them before signing off on any of the approvals.
And I think from our standpoint, there's a minimal number of elements that would be in that an HOA would have to respond to or would be responsible for.
Have we had any new construction developments come through Victoria without an HOA?
In the almost 2 years that I've been here, they've all had HOAs. And I believe most of the ones prior to that had HOAs, but I can't speak for farther back than a couple of years in certainty.
In my opinion, this is my opinion, HOAs are a really good thing. I mean, you can receive savings on your trash pickup, and there's some economies of scale with an HOA that you can't get otherwise. I don't know.
HOAs also layer in some extra costs when you look at insurance and some of those things. So it depends upon what the HOA is responsible for. I think you could still negotiate trash removal as a neighborhood to that point. We've done that in ours, but it doesn't flow through the HOA, but we just all got together and did it.
It's a vehicle.
The architectural control, what kind of fence you can have, some of those kinds of things. Can't paint your house purple or whatever. Those kinds of things to keep the neighbors all working together. Sometimes the framework of the HOA, but maybe these declarations, do that without having to have a formal HOA and bring in having to file a tax return and all that kind of stuff that the HOA has to do. It adds up when you don't have that many homes. It adds up per house, right?
Is it possible to be absorbed by another community? I'm just thinking across the street with Madelyn Creek. Probably never happened, but
one of the, and certainly from our city standpoint, is the crossing on 78th Street to get to the park. I think that would be a major concern, something that would have to be addressed, certainly at this point.
Yeah, and the intention would be that there would be a crosswalk across there. Traffic coming on Coachella would stop, but at the moment, as I mentioned, the traffic coming from 78th would not have a stop sign, as the traffic doesn't meet the warrants currently.
And Coachella would be where the crosswalk would be?
Yeah, at the intersection of Coachella and 78th, correct.
Any other concerns, any other questions? Are we all okay with the impervious surface issue? Are we in agreement on that? A definite yes?
Yes, for me.
I'm good with the impervious aspect. I want to go back to the HOA, and as I just said, okay, is there any way that this can be absorbed? This is phase one of this Madelyn Trail concept. So there's going to be another, I don't know how many houses are in this, 60 homes. Assuming there's another 60 that would be on the south end of this 5 years down the road, is there a way that we would put documentation together and documents, covenants, and the whole works so that when that second phase goes in, perhaps this whole community is one homeowners association?
Commissioner Pedersen, Chair, I'll let the developer address that, but I do not believe that other property is currently under contract with Pulte, so it may or may not be the same development.
Mr. Chair, members of the council, we don't control that property at this time, so it's hard to address that issue right now.
Sure. Understood.
Is it typical that Pulte and their developments do not establish HOAs? Or is this new for Pulte as well?
No, I think that it does occur once in a while, but keep in mind I've been around for 7 months, so
Oh, so
I'm trying to track as much as
We understand.
I can. But no, it has happened since I've been here, but it's pretty rare, generally speaking. It's usually if there are a lot of common areas or amenities that are kind of particular to a given neighborhood, a lot of times that will trigger an HOA. In this case, there just isn't. In fact, there was discussion whether there would even be a monument sign or not, and that a lot of times if you have an outlot with a monument sign and maybe some plantings and things like that, maybe some floral arrangements that would need more attendance, you would have an HOA that would take responsibility for that. So other than that, I'm not sure that I can say even more why there isn't an HOA necessarily recommended for this neighborhood, but other than that, there's not much for it to do, I think.
Is it just the savings on the kind of legal fee side of getting the paperwork together? Or I'm just trying to understand. I think what I anticipate might happen is that 60 residents move in and then they go, oh wait, we need an HOA, and then they're trying to come up with the paperwork and get that together, and that becomes a little challenging for a group of 60 residents. And I understand without much common area, but you still have, do I get to put a shed, and what does that shed look like, and do I get to put, and then they all come to the city because there's no first pass through the HOA, is what I would kind of anticipate might happen there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, to the commissioner's question, I think if the HOA existed, it might regulate the aesthetic treatments of a shed, let's say, but still impervious surface limitations or requirements, setbacks, things of that nature. Those are all still going to fall under the regulatory arm of the city, so they would still be coming to you for that reason. And you didn't ask me necessarily about the impervious surface coverage, but one of the things that I do appreciate about the Community Development Director's recommendation on that is that it does allow for a decent amount of square footage on all of the lots. And what that does is it keeps our customers happy because they can do a little extra on their property, and it hopefully mitigates them having to come to the city every time they need like a variance or something of that nature. So hopefully it cuts down on the amount of visits or disappointed conversations that you have here at City Hall.
And I'll just jump into, Mr. Lauder's correct. Any of the zoning ordinance related to sheds and swimming pools and fences, even with HOAs, we still review those permits and have to approve those permits. Oftentimes, it's more of the aesthetic. The city has some aesthetic zoning code. I think like with our accessory structures, we say it needs to be a comparable building material as the principal structure, whereas you might see HOAs have more stringent aesthetic type requirements. But as far as the actual zoning and setbacks and impervious surface, we see those anyway coming through us for permits.
But it is about architectural control, right? I mean, so we allow sheds in our neighborhood, but you have to paint the same color as your house. We allow fences, but no chain link fences. So you're getting that architectural control there. It's probably the main thing that the HOA is doing. You know, we're taking turns mowing the monument, but the HOA is responsible for doing that just to save money. So I don't know what the declarations do. I don't know if you can have architectural control without an HOA. Maybe that's really the question.
I would suggest that the path of least resistance actually is an HOA. And then there's no debate later on or, any time in between. I mean, I think HOAs are kind of viewed various different ways. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. Ultimately, it's a good thing if it's set up properly to essentially keep it clean. And I think, in a nutshell, that's ultimately what an HOA would do in this particular case. So, but that has to be done pre-sale and it has to be documented and all of the terms and conditions. And do we want to address that as a term and condition at the same time?
Christian, you're pretty involved in your HOA in your neighborhood, right? Yes. Are there penalties, financial penalties within an HOA if someone, if they don't comply with the rules outside of city?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Usually they're compounding. If somebody hasn't, every 30 days, it essentially doubles.
It's difficult to enforce, right? You eventually would have to file a lien against their house
Yes.
to really enforce it. So the HOA powers are not as great as you might think.
Sure.
And you're gonna have a legal cost to file the liens and stuff, but it is there, and the people do agree to all the provisions within the HOA documents when they purchase the house. They are signing off for all of those provisions, so at least it provides the framework for that.
Which ultimately is the key,
Yeah.
is that there's some definition, so.
And chair, members of the commission, before we go too far down that path, I'm not an attorney. We'd have to talk to our city attorney, but I don't believe that we can condition the establishment of an HOA as part of a development.
There's homes in the older part of Victoria that are just on a street and they don't have an HOA, right? So I don't know that we can mandate it. I think we could recommend that they consider something like that their neighborhood people buying in might appreciate. And I don't know if there's other means to do the architectural control, because that's probably the big one.
Which the declaration, you could,
And the declarations cover that.
they can put stuff in the declarations that say, it's gotta have, can't have vinyl siding on the front or, has to be painted neutral colors or whatever, I mean, your declarations can be, it's just enforceability of it is, if somebody doesn't do it, where do you go? Who do you go after? I mean, that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, somebody paints their house purple, it's like, well, okay, they did it, but now where do we go? I mean, the declaration, if the association says no, and who's going to enforce it? That's the biggest thing is, coming up with the enforceability part of it. And I don't know that answer. I mean, I've been part of our HOA board and we have the same thing, I mean, somebody, we have a no fence rule unless it's around the swimming pool, but then it's just around the swimming pool, not around the whole lot. But then they put it around the whole lot, and then it's like, what do you do? You're out of compliance. And until they sell their house, you can say you're out of compliance. And then they sell their house and whatever, you know. Again, it's, like you said, it's putting a lien on their house if they, you know, it's not like you can go and move their fence on them or repaint their house and then charge them for it. I don't have any, I mean, I was just kind of, it's just, I mean, if that's the way the city wants to work with it, I mean, I don't have a problem doing it. It's just, until you see what they are and get the attorney involved, you don't have, I mean, that's fine.
Chair and Commission, just to piggyback off on that as well, that the city would typically not enforce HOA covenants or restrictions if they are more stringent than city code. So even if the question as to enforcement, if they're within a declaration without a HOA is a valid one, because if there's something in a HOA declaration that is more stringent than city code, the city typically would not enforce that beyond what city code requirements are.
I think that leaves it pretty definitive that we could not mandate at the same time, so it is the way it's structured at this particular point. Any other discussion on any parts of it, any additional concerns?
I just think when we say we cannot enforce an HOA, you know, it somewhat ends right there. I think that this is a little bit of an experiment, and I think with the next 60 homes that come in below that in the next 5 to 10 years, the experiment could get a little bit more complicated. But as Marty said, from a legal standpoint, we can't force an HOA. So,
You know, to that point, they could get really tricky because I think the Parks and Rec is going to require a larger park in that southern section, and that is going to be a much larger shared area that will have to be thought through. So we don't have to solve that right now today, but it is something to be thoughtful about.
Yeah, so we can recommend you investigate it, maybe reconsider.
Just a note, Commissioner Moore, members of the commission, if a park is part of the future development, that would be the city's responsibility as a neighborhood park. So there are times where HOAs want to put in a little 1 acre, 2 acre tot lot that is an HOA owned and maintained park. Those are typically the exception, not the rule. Most parks would be city owned and maintained.
Okay,
So just to clarify.
thanks.
Very good, very good. Any other concerns? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion.
I recommend the city council approve the final plat, comp plan amendment, and rezoning for Madelyn Trail with conditions as presented and discussed.
Do I hear a second?
I'd second that.
Thank you very much. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. The motion does carry. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you for answering the questions at the same time, so. Very good. The second item on our discussion agenda is item 3.2, discussion on ordinance 414, designated predatory residency restriction. This item is for discussion purposes only this evening. Before we begin our discussion, I will turn it back over to Community and Economic Development Director Marty Dole to provide background on the topic.
Thank you, Chair, members of the commission. Yes, this may be the shortest presentation I have done before this commission. But yes, we are here to just discuss briefly the Ordinance 414 designated predatory offender residency restrictions. As some background, last evening, the City Council held a special meeting and a public hearing to discuss discuss potential amendments to that ordinance. And as this would fall under the purview of a zoning ordinance, state statute does require the planning commission to hear and provide any recommendations on those ordinances. We do not have a draft prepared, obviously, as that public hearing was just held last night. The intention is that based on community feedback, council direction, and if there's anything additional this body would like us to review or look at, we would bring that actual draft ordinance before this body tentatively at our August 17th meeting, but we'll kind of play that by ear as to when that gets put together. So yes, tonight's meeting is really meant just for discussion only. Hopefully many of you had an opportunity to watch the meeting, hear the public feedback. So really just a discussion. If there's any additional feedback, anything that you didn't hear at that meeting that you think we should consider or look at this point in time. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair, to lead any discussion or take it.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Marty.
What were the key changes? I did not see the meeting last night,
Yeah,
but you shared with us the prior copy. So what are the key changes that, even though they haven't drafted it yet, what do you think is coming?
Yeah, so the just as a little recap of the meeting, there is an organized neighborhood group in the area where the current offender has moved in, and they provided a draft ordinance as part of a presentation to the city council of things that they'd like the city council to consider that I think based on the direction received, they were generally supportive of. So the revised ordinance will likely be fairly close to what this the group had proposed, and some of those changes were some additional buffer areas, so a larger buffer around some of the parks, schools, those sorts of things. Inclusion of buffers for level 1 and 2 offenders who have specifically offended against children. So currently the city's ordinance only speaks to level 3 offenders, but the proposal including some buffers for 1 and 2 offenders specifically that have offended children, with the council direction of also to consider vulnerable adults as part of that level 1 and 2 area. An addition of a prohibition on participating in events that are associated or for children, things like dressing up as Santa Claus at Christmas or passing out candy at Halloween, those sorts of things. But for the most part, I believe it was relatively in line with the current ordinance with some of those additional pieces, so.
Yeah, well, there was a number of us that did watch it, and I thought that the substitute city attorney did a good job of explaining, essentially, here's what we as a city can do legitimately, and didn't get into anything that we necessarily can't do at the same time. The group itself was, I believe she was an attorney. At least she spoke like an attorney. And it is a legal issue in its truest form that will have to be dealt with by the city. And so there's some verbiage that has to be very well defined, and there's state law that has to be followed, and so it was I think it was a healthy discussion. It was not a contentious event at all, fortunately. And I think there were people that were making their case, and I think they did a very good job, well organized. So the additions that I saw, I think that's logical. I mean, it was logical to me. Some of the amendments to the original, but it is a very important issue, and it's a very, very serious issue. However anyone may view the whole thing. So, I'm glad that it was addressed the way it was, and I think we'll see a pretty good end result. in a document that we'll have to work with. Any other thoughts on the issue?
The only question I had, and I don't quite understand why libraries are 500 feet when you have schools and every place else is 1,600 or 2,000 feet. Why is that only at 500? Would be a question I would like to ask. And then the other question I had was in regards to, and it might be covered under state statutes, I don't know. They talked about holiday parties or birthday parties, but is there a restriction on just even city events like movie at the park or concerts in the park or things where children might, or vulnerable adults or might be around, I mean, is there a restriction on how close they can go to those events, I guess?
Yeah, Commissioner.
And I don't know if that's, again, it's a legal thing. I mean, it's like, well, you can't go to a kid's baseball game or, is that too restrictive or what, and I don't know where that answer is.
Yeah, Commissioner Kuhn, members of the commission, that's great questions. The first one, 500 feet, I honestly don't know why that number. If you look at comparative ordinances, it's 500 feet, but that's a good question that we'll take back to the city attorney as we're drafting this. Is there a reason or rationale why that is much less than the others? I don't know the answer to that. And then to your second question, the direction I think that we got from council is that they would like to see that prohibition on events broadened further than just the holiday events. So that will also be something we'll be talking with the city attorney about. Is there language that can broaden that a little more, so it's not specifically holiday events, but more so any types of events that are meant for children or attendance by children.
I think our mayor made what I thought was a very appropriate comment at the same time, and said that a lot of the verbiage will be done by the attorneys, and for us to define the law. We may not necessarily want to do that, but we may want to, what we're really here to do is to define the principles that we want in this document. So I think that, that made a lot of sense to me. That's how to proceed.
Well, and I also think we're kind of swimming out of our lane there as well. I think our job's to review what comes back and then make recommendations. I'm not going to get into, I know what the city ordinance is, that's my job. I'm not involved with the county ordinance, I'm not involved with the state statutes, and I'm not involved with the federal laws. Yeah, we can make recommendations, but I think that kind of swimming out of our lane to say, well, we don't believe level 3 predators should live within 100,000 feet of, any sort of school. Well, that violates a county ordinance. Okay, that also violates a state statute. Now where are we? All right, well, let's drop it to 10,000 feet. Okay, well, that only violates the county. It's kind of swimming out of our lane, if you want my opinion on it.
Very definitely. Yeah, I would very much concur with that. Yeah, I think I'm looking forward to the finished product, and I thought that the input that everyone had that was in attendance was very good, and we'll have our opportunity to dissect it from that.
Yeah, look forward to that.
Sadly, we can't be the only community who has had to deal with this issue, so I don't know what other towns have done.
Staff has put together a good packet that was presented at the meeting. I would recommend you go out and just even look at the agenda from last night's meeting and download the packet that was put together. It had the PowerPoint that the neighborhood put together. It had surveys that Marty and Isaac put together from different towns that had different stuff, but it was very well presented. And that's why I think the discussion last night was very civil and very good. And it was just a direction of staff, and that's kind of where we're at right now is let's see what staff comes back with and where we go from there.
I would say that the good news is once we do have an amendment to review, it's going to be well vetted. It's going to be, an attorney will have blessed it. Safe to assume?
Safe to assume.
Right. Yeah, and by a variety of people.
Yes.
At the same time, so yeah, I think it'll be very good. Any other thing before we close this out? We'll wait for the document. Thank you very much. This does conclude this item. Moving on to the miscellaneous section of our agenda. One of the, Commissioner Julie Murray has a report on, doesn't have a report.
Jared,
I have a report.
we swapped.
Garrett, okay, excellent.
The Monday, July 12th meeting for city council was very quick. They approved the final plat for Rolling Hills development. And it was quick and simple and easy, and not a lot of activity at the meeting, so it was one of the shorter city council meetings.
I made a bad trade.
It's a gift, Jared. Consider it my first gift to you.
I presented that item from my childhood basement in North Dakota, so I was virtual. I was back in North Dakota last week. So it was done from my deer-themed wood-paneled bedroom from my
Oh, boy,
childhood. So.
That's so great.
good for you.
That's funny.
Good for you. Yeah, and I, the feedback that I've had, quite frankly, is that there's the feedback of having one of us in attendance is very, very well received. So that's a good thing. The other thing that I would add is that when you look at the agenda, and if you're going to be at the meeting, and if there's a issue that you'd like to comment on, well, let me just leave it at comment on. It is an opportunity. You can take your 5 minutes and you can comment on a agenda item or a item of any nature at the same time too. And I would, quite frankly, I would encourage that if there's something that you feel is important or would be noteworthy and productive at the same time too. So the next meeting is Jay Nebbins is next to attend the next meeting, and then Terry is the backup for Jay.
Yep.
At the same time too.
Backup one. Somebody's backup too.
Yeah, let's see.
Just in case.
Christian Pedersen
Yeah, I might be
is
back.
number 2 on the. And it doesn't mean that only one of you can attend at the same time. A group activity. Is there any miscellaneous?
Yeah, Chair, members of the commission, a couple of miscellaneous items from staff. So first of all, we did receive here in the last week or so a resignation from Planning Commission alternate number 1, Kristen Thoresen. She is having some medical difficulties, and we had planned to wait through the first half of the year and see how she was doing, and she decided to resign from the commission. So we are working through our on-deck list that was developed by the council to try and pick up a alternate number 2. The intention would be to move Jay Nebbin up to alternate number 1 and move someone from the on-deck list. So we are hoping to have that on Monday's council agenda, although although if I can't get connected with the on deck or get a confirmation from on deck, it may get pushed to the August meeting. But just a note for the commission that we will be looking to add a new alternate. And then secondly, just a reminder that there is no planning commission on August 3rd due to Night to Unite, formerly National Night Out. So our next meeting will be August 17th. You get a week off.
So you'll be visiting all the neighborhoods?
So I don't know if I should say this publicly, but I will actually be gone again. I will be at WeFest in Detroit Lakes the week of National Night Out, so I will personally not be visiting all the
We
neighborhoods.
won't look for you.
Still be out.
I will
We'll
be
be
out.
having a night out.
Yeah, yeah.
And that would go in the category of excused absence.
Right, right.
No problem with that. Commissioners, any other items? Hearing none, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. All of those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. The motion does carry. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thanks.